Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Tales and Tactics. Today, Beyond the Book. This is our show that breaks down the fundamental concepts that go behind our tabletop gaming and how we play them. I'm your host, Troy. Joining me as ever is my co-host, Max, and with us behind the scenes is our producer, Jay. Today, our episode is arts and crafts. Terrain, models, paint, and glue. This is the stuff that doesn't make our games go, but makes us want to come back to them time and time again. This is kind of like that secret heat, that juice that makes the tabletop games, whether they're RPG miniatures or a full wargaming army, they make the act of playing the game more than just like an exercise in playing checkers or moving within the confines of a rule system. They imply so much more character, setting, and life into the game. So even though it might take 100 hours to paint a full army, Max, do you think it's worth it?
It's a hobby in a hobby,
it
right?
Is.
Like there's rules, and then there's these cool things that you get to make that are like a living diorama. Or some people even just go all the way with that. At its least, it is a supplementary activity that is fun for its own sake. And at its best, or its greatest, however you want to say that, it adds immersion to the... There's a big difference between playing with painted and unpainted miniatures on a table. And I know, it's like, there's a taboo about playing with unpainted miniatures. I have my own thoughts about this, but it brings a lot to the game when you can easily drop your imagination right into that space, and having like a painted guy. Also, just it's cool to show off your painted characters.
It's fun. It's rewarding in its own right. I was someone who for years resisted painting and hobbying for two primary reasons. One, it's a lot of work. And two, because I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to buy these models that I like and wreck them. I'm not doing good like the box makes them look. But that's not the point. The point is the process that you go through in the painting and in the hobbying that like draws you closer into the whole experience. Like, for example, there have been titles. We can look at X-Wing, for example, as a perfect example of a game that was pre-painted models. And that was a game that I certainly enjoyed playing and had a small collection of, but I never felt a degree of personal affection, ownership, or I guess like personality to those figures in a way that I feel about my World War II collection, where I've like hand painted my 15 mil guys and based them myself and gone through this big process with them. You know, like I've done my German platoon. I'm almost done my Canadian platoon now. I'm like 7 guys away. So we're getting there. But that process to me, I resisted and didn't want to do. But when I finally committed to doing it with my first historical armies for the first edition of Chain of Command many years ago, it really did strike me how much better the game feels. And I mean, it doesn't play any different. You know, you don't roll sixes more, but the game itself felt like something new. And when you really invest in a table with models, and don't forget terrain, you can actually take your experience and elevate it in a way that even a rule set can't.
Yeah, because I personally don't have a big problem with playing with unpainted miniatures. I think for me, the taboo is when you mix them.
I get that. Like, I've played a ton of unpainted models because I've acquired models faster and I can paint them, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective. But I would say that, like, you don't need to have them painted. You can have a great time with gray on gray fights. That's not like, I don't want to disparage that because I've done that a million times in my solo gaming, particularly, you know, just getting like different factions together for a small game, you know, different skirmish armies or whatever. But there is something to be said about the commitment it takes to do something that's a little more invested than that. So I guess to kind of like get down to the start, the models, the figures, the miniatures, the little guys, they come in a variety of shape sizes and materials. There are plastic models, there are pewter models, there are resin models, there are wood ones, I'm sure, but there are a range of, and there are paper models, cannot forget, paper cardstock models that come with printed imagery on them. So that's like a little bit different in that you're not really painting them, but you are still like doing some paper folding and constructive work to get them prepared for the table nevertheless.
It's like an economic sort of advantage, I guess. That you can get like card standees, or you can do full, I guess, technically it's not origami because it's not made with one piece or like whole pieces of paper, but like paper craft models I've seen.
Yes, I have too. I've seen some like tanks and stuff.
Obviously, you need these pieces to play the game. Though, again, the level of abstraction with that can be very simple. You can use like card chits, like little tokens, effectively, with symbols on them. And, that worked back in the 70s. There's no reason it couldn't work now.
Well, exactly, right? Well, it's kind of like a two-dimensional wargaming, and you certainly can do that. That's not impossible at all. There have been two-dimensional card-based wargames that have come out, like a Fantasy Battle-y one, 10, 15 years ago that had decks of cards, and the cards were the units. They were the footprint and template, and you just measured and slid them around like it was a war game, but in fact, it was cards. So that was a novel game at its time, but it wasn't new. It was new in that it packaged it as a product, but that idea of playing with a flat card template has been around, like NATO symbols, just put the cross belt of your Napoleonic infantry on a rectangle, kaplow, you've now got an infantry unit. So there's ways to do the hobby and the craft side of this gaming without needing to invest in models or a lot of resources. There are ways to cut down on the overhead that does come with a hobby that is materially based. Like, for example, role-playing can be materially based, but you can also play it pretty cerebrally, I'll put it. Where in wargaming, you can't really theater of the mind a Warhammer battle. It doesn't really work. Like, there are role-playing games that allow you to do that, like L5R with its mass battle rules, but they don't achieve the same aim of like, I have moved here and I am flanking here and taking advantage of this wood for cover. Like, that doesn't happen in the theater of the mind in the same way. So I am really drawn to just something that is representative, that can be abstract. That's not a problem, but it has to be representative of what it is that I want to capture on the table. And I tend to find that I'm drawn to 3D miniatures because I love the character and style as opposed to like the card stock options. And I'm bad because I like different scales. So I even have World War II in multiple scales, which is kind of silly ultimately, but I do. I know a lot of us do, but it's hard to justify it ultimately. But unless you're doing like wickedly different concepts, right? But like I do 15 mil as my primary World War II scale, and my two main games, Chain and O Group, I can do in 15. So like my 28 mil Chain ambitions have kind of cooled off because I've got 15. It works. It's perfect. I have no complaints. So that's just a perspective. But when it comes to models, you can get them in sizes ranging from 2 to 3 mil, all the way up to 54 millimeter and beyond. The most common scales you'll find tend to revolve around the 2-inch, 28 millimeter, kind of like your thumb. And that's like a Warhammer model, commonly.
Yeah.
And that would be sort of your scale of a wargaming miniature, right? That dates right back to the 70s when Citadel was sculpting them. Prior to that time, the 25 millimeter historical models were sort of what that's extrapolated from. And those were made for decades. So there's a pedigree and a tradition to this. You can also go smaller than 28 mil because 28 mil is great in terms of the character, the detail, and the presence of a model. Downsides, though, is there's more surface area to cover and more detail to account for.
Yeah, I think that the historical popularity of 28 mil is the fidelity of the figure.
Yes, I agree with you.
Troy and I were talking in preparation for this, and we were talking about how only some of the more recent advancements in 3D printing and stuff like that have honestly helped out 15 mil and smaller scale than 28, which it's made 28 look great, or even 30, or you can go with irregular sizes now. You can make it whatever you like. But when it gets to those smaller scales, you're getting that better definition where we were talking about like old 15 mil pewter ones, and they just look like potato people.
I don't want to call out manufacturers and be like mean, but there's definitely a few names that I know that I'm like, that guy looks like he's shouting. the guy's mouth is just like a donut hole. Oh, and that's like the expression on every one of the dudes. You know who I'm talking about if you buy 15 mil pewter models.
Right.
And it's like seeing the rise of the AutoCAD plastic and the sort of like machine assisted process. It does lose sort of that like classic like green sculpted 3-up model, you know, where there was like that artist touch. Like I appreciate that. But what we've been able to get by moving to these plastic kits, by moving to some of these more refined approaches, is a level of detail that is really hard to snuff at. Like these 15 mil Battlefront Commonwealth infantry I'm painting presently, right? They don't have any of the pouch blur. You know what I'm talking about? When like bags and pouches and tunics become one thing kind of, and you don't know where one ends and one begins, and you're just like, hopefully the ink covers this. You know what I mean?
The undifferentiated mass. Yeah, I get that.
The undifferentiated mass, thank you. And that was an old standby in 15 pewter. 10 millimeter pewter is like that. 6 millimeter pewter is basically that entirely. So it's like, it can be difficult. But the rise of the more modern approaches, like Max said, the 3D printed stuff that you can dial in the scaling to your preference. There's a lot you can do now. And I still like pewter is great because it's tough and it's timeless. It's hard to work with because your paints will scrub off and rub off. And they require a certain level of care in their storage because you can't just like put a bunch in a box with like a bubble wrap over top of it and then cart it over to your bud's place, because that amount of jostling will just destroy those models' paint jobs. Where plastic models with a coat of varnish, you're fine. It won't matter. Nothing will happen. But with metal models, it's that much harder to keep the paint on them unless you're that much more careful. And you can put like a Humbrol gloss varnish, slather that all over it, and it'll be fine for the rest of your life, to your grandchildren's life. But like sort of the more modern matte finish, you know, that you may like to see on these like really crisply painted models. On a pewter model, you might just be inviting the chip off. I sound like I'm complaining, and maybe I am, but the pewter is something that I'm glad that I had my time with when I was younger, but I don't see myself as sourcing them now, where I know there are people who go to eBay, who go to more independent sculptors and get them because that's what makes them happy, and they're passionate about that. And I respect that. But I just find the flexibility and ease of use in working with a plastic is so much greater. Resin is similar. Like I find resin pretty chill, except for how brittle it is. You can snap a resin part pretty easily if you're acting ungracefully, we'll call it.
There's so many options now for like what a thing can be made out of and what advantages and disadvantages. I remember there were like arguments for using pewter models. The chipping is obviously an issue that's quite common. I also found even priming them to be a little bit weird. Like if I wasn't using aerosol, the coating would like not adhere very evenly. Mm-hmm. And you shouldn't need a lot of coating, but you need it for pewter. And yeah, if I wasn't spraying them, it would peel. Or if I didn't let it set properly, it would peel. So I feel like with pewter, it's really a nostalgia thing, or maybe it's a feel thing for some people, like the weight of it.
Yes.
There's going to be some diehards that are going to probably come out of the woodwork and tell us all the advantages of pewter models.
And I know there are some.
There are so many options now for what a thing could be made out of that, I don't know, and they all have their own advantages and disadvantages. And yeah, I mean, what's your take? Like, do you have a favorite material that you're enjoying at the moment?
Gotta be a plastic guy, even though there are concerns about plastic environmentally with sprues, with all these other factors. Like they're not perfect, and I can absolutely acknowledge that. I do find it the best material to work with, both for modeling and painting. And I love a good plastic box set, you know, with like multiple arms and you glue them together. Like that to me is very satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to basing, are you someone that is like committed to basing the way you're supposed to, quote, for a model? Like, oh, here's the game system based this way. Or are you comfortable just taking those models and slapping them on a base of your own imagination, definition, or from a different third-party game that you're just like more interested in actually playing?
It depends a lot on the scale of the model. When I think about basing,
Oh, okay. Yes.
I like to use, so with 15 mils, I order on Amazon brass slugs, or you can get them in like steel or whatever. It might be better to get them in an iron-based metal so that you can use them magnetically if you want to store them. But I don't like plastic bases, generally speaking. If I do use plastic bases, I will add weight to the bottom of them, because I guess I take one thing from the people who play with the pewter models. The weight does matter to me, though I actually find with a lot of some pewter models, they give you a plastic base, which is like the worst of both. So now it's like top heavy, and it doesn't have a very strong like grounding. Whereas I'll either use metal bases and really flat ones for smaller miniatures. You use pennies.
I use pennies for my individually based 15 mils, and I use quarters and nickels. So what I do is I put like one rifleman on a penny, or a 15 mil guy, and a penny is like 19 point something millimeters. So it's pretty close to a 20 mic base, which is great. So I do one of those, put the dude on it. For like a simple weapons team, like a LMG crew of 2 guys or maybe a light mortar, I'll put them on a quarter. Mm-hmm. So it's like 2 guys based together. So it's easy to identify that as separate from my riflemen. And then for leaders, I take a penny and sit that on top of a nickel to get like a tiered step effect. So the leader's just slightly elevated. I don't know, maybe for line of sight purposes, that's a mistake. But this is not 28 millimeters. So you're typically not playing quite so like over the shoulder with line of sight, you know what I mean? Like checking it like a video game camera angle, not quite so often are you doing that in 15.
Right.
So it's kind of negligible. But those are the 3 types of coins I use, and they work really well. You can use brass washers like you talk about, steel ones. I know what you mean about the magnetics, but the thing is a lot of primers are actually way better suited to brass than steel. So if you actually want to get like a 2-coat primer down on like a base, you could apply a Vallejo primer to a brass and it would work just fine. It wouldn't take like 6 coats of you hitting your head against the wall.
So I don't know that so I'm going to say why, at least how I do it, doesn't matter that much, because I will add mud to the top of it so that I'm not painting a flat base. I usually will brush a little PVA glue, let that dry, and then I'll add mudding to it. Because and with the case of like any metal, a lot of the mud doesn't like a lot of these plastic muds don't like to stick super well.
Oh yes.
Some of the ones I've been using lately have actually not needed any kind of, I guess you're priming the metal in a different way, but yeah.
Right.
But yeah, so like do you not add terrain to the top of yours?
I do. I use diorama effects, which is sort of like the pay-to-play version of a gritty PVA sand mix. You know what I mean? So I use a diorama effects mud paste by our great friends at Vallejo. First, I prime the base in black, just in case the mud, because this mud, when it dries, it sucks in, it retracts. So I make sure the base is painted black in case there's any little pockets or little areas where I haven't applied that mud paint in quite the right distribution. So if it sucks in and it shows a little bit of the base, it's going to show black, which can be easily corrected, as opposed to it showing, bare base, which is quite an issue you have to correct. But what I'll do is I'll paint the base black. I'll get my Vallejo diorama effects and get my dental tool, and I'll just apply that, kind of push it around, get it on the base, push it between the legs. I go thick with it because I want there to be earth. I don't want it to be flat with a grit texture. I want it to be like an earth texture, like mud. Once that sets, I take Army Painter Strong Tone and I stain and wash the mud. Why I use Strong Tone by Army Painter instead of Agrax Earthshade is that Strong Tone actually has enough pigment in it that it stains the color of what you're washing, more so than Agrax Earthshade does. So what it does is it takes this sort of clay mid-tone earth color and stains it down into a darker earth. And you can buy a darker earth color diorama effect. But why I like the wash is that it applies a bit of a gradient coloration. So you have a degree of the lighter brown in some areas, and then the wash saturates and enriches the color in the recesses and in other parts where it gets overpooled, so to speak. But because it's just dirt, it doesn't look like you coffee stained it or you over inked it because it's mud. It's going to be different coloration, different texture, have a puddle in it. You know what I mean? And once I've done that, I'll take a skeleton bone light color. So, your classic bony off-white, your cream, your eggshell, something like that. It can be an art painter. It could be a GW1. It could be Vallejo. It doesn't matter. I'll take that, get my makeup dry brush, get it all off, dry brush, get most of that paint off really aggressively. And then I'll just lightly hit the mud paint. And then it's just going to pick out the little ridges and little flecks of dirt from that texture paste that is elevated. And it will create this lighting effect that's very minimal. It's very simple, but this process creates awesome looking bases. Throw a tuft or two on there, like one of your glue-on grass tufts, your choice, like wild green or something. I don't know, whatever suits your theater of war. And then you've got a base. So that's my approach. That's how I've done it. I tend to use that approach for all of my basing across different models and different periods, but I'll change the tufts. So like the way I do it is the tufts are different in different periods. So my Normandy forces all have like a rich green, you know what I mean? Where I've done my sci-fi 40K, 30K stuff is like, like kind of burned dead grass, kind of like, it's the future. Grass is dead now.
Right.
So that's kind of been my approach with using like a basing system, so to speak.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm actually very minimal with my bases. I have added fiber and tufts like that, but I'm very choosy about how I use that because I don't want it to distract from the figure.
That's a good point.
I'm thinking about it more in a compositional sense. One thing I like to do is use a mud mixture, either one that I use a thick bodied paint, and then I'll add like sand, like really fine sand too, or something like that. And I'll glob that on there and I'll press it down to make it as thin and textured as possible. And then I will probably use if we're doing 15 mil, I'll like turn around a brush and I'll mold in as it starts to dry. I'll mold in like little divots or footprints and things like that. And so I'm using more like sculpted detail rather than material on top of that. I usually save all of the tufts and stuff like that for terrain pieces.
Oh.
For like the bases of terrain.
For under trees or ridges for rocks and stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, or around the edges of like buildings and stuff like that, if it actually has space for something like that. Because also it's just very likely that when you're moving pieces around, I don't make them like diorama pieces exactly. I try to get away with that as much as I can, but I really am thinking about them more like play pieces.
Yes, a game piece. That's true.
I want all the detail to be sculpted and tight on it, and I want to make sure that it's durable.
Because like, for example, okay, you're playing a game in Normandy, 15 mil, you run into your MDF building cafe. You take the lid off of the cafe and you have the first floor. You load your dudes in with their penny bases, but they all have tufts of grass and you can't quite fit them in. Are you stacking models on top of each other's bases, even though there's like this 3D grass you're kind of tamping down? Like it's true. There are times where making dioramic pieces is a compromise to the playability of that very piece. But man, can it look really good when you've got you get an MG team with like that extra bush on the base, just to really sell it. And they're like standing next to the hedgerows and you like lean in with your cell phone and take that picture. It feels good. It's fun.
I do save a lot of those little extra sort of earth material touches for things like vehicles or emplacements. Like that's another example. Like even if I'm doing like sandbags or something, I like to squeeze in a few little tufts of grass and stuff like that at the base.
Oh.
So yeah, that's what my concern is, that if you're like crowding guys in, you're going to run into some issues where you're going to flatten some of the grass, and maybe that would look fine. But I usually like to have that be a bit more, with the individual figures, to be a bit more manageable. I think if they were 28 mil, and I'm getting more into that now, I probably use more of those little bits and pieces.
It really sells the 28. I agree.
Yeah, I think you can appreciate it more, again, because the characters got that higher fidelity. They look better generally.
And they stand taller relative to the height of most of the sold grass tufts, therefore making them less prominent on the base of the model.
Yeah.
So I know what you mean, like, because the grass tuft is like 4 to 6 millimeters tall, sometimes 2 or 3, but a lot of the ones you buy are about 4 millimeters tall. And on a 15 millimeter model, that's like clearing the knee sometimes. And that can not always work visually depending on what you're setting yourself in. I'm in Norman farm country, so I don't care. There's bushes, but I know exactly what you mean, though, in terms of the presence that it can take up on a model's place.
But there's fun thing, like with like tanks, like a really fun one that our buddy Darren has done and I've played around with is like cramming what looks like sod into the treads.
Oh, very cool. Yes, on his American Shermans. Yeah, that's right. Those look really cool.
So like that sort of stuff. And so if you want to hear one of my pet peeves, and it is. I'm sure there's an exception to this that I would find, but I don't like fresh looking models. I don't like guys in like perfect uniforms. I want mud on it.
I agree. The way, as you may have gathered, the way that I do painting is I am an ink wash guy. When you apply total ink washes or things that are not pin washed, as we'll get into maybe a little bit later, it's like you're going to have a shaded, higher contrast, dirtier, murkier guy unless you spend a lot of time reapplying layers to build back up those lights. So you kind of got to decide when you're applying a wash, what's my finish going to be? And for me, I'm trying to achieve these these war-weary soldiers who have mud up to their knees and they've been in a foxhole, right? So I really don't mind that look. But if you're painting, say, a brightly colored yellow Imperial Fist Space Marine, you are going to really need to think about how you approach shading in a different way than just applying sort of a dirty wash over the whole dang thing.
Yeah, like you want to be selective about it. A nice sort of artist trick, like because I come from an illustration background as well as like layouts and stuff like that. But just get a toothbrush, like an old ass toothbrush. Get some thin paint, but like something opaque. Probably not contrast. Though you could do this in layers and just like pull the bristles back with your thumb and get in real close to their like ankles and just give it a little, and it looks like they've been walking and it sprayed the mud up at them.
Oh, yes.
Just as regards to the worn and weathered, like it looks like it's been on the table, the one area where I get really, I don't want to knock anybody's work, but I am so surprised with Battletech miniatures that people don't scuff them up more.
I know.
Like in the lore, these are like ancient machines very often.
Yeah, it's like a 200-year-old robot.
Yeah, and it's been through the ringer a bunch of times. And yeah, sure, they put a fresh coat of paint on it occasionally. But if there was ever an excuse to get files out and start like finally like cutting like battle damage into it, especially because there's no assembly with the current line of models, so, you just get the whole thing. You can spend that extra time getting like really fine cuts and like stuff that when you paint into them and you use things like contrast paints, man, that stuff would just pop.
Oh, if you have a Dremel rotary tool, like with like the millimeter tool bits, that's hardcore modeling stuff. Like if you're doing like resin kits, like you're doing that, you can put divots in, you can put little gashes in. There's lots of little tricks you can do. You can use files for that, just like you said. Yeah, I find battle damage hard to achieve, but once satisfyingly, resulted at, like, man, does it sell something.
Yeah. I definitely lean more, like, as I said, because of the sculpted, I tend to think of it more like sculpted pieces or sculpted approach.
Yes.
I'm a lot less careful with the paint and I pay a lot more attention to the actual models. So like, if I want those things, I'm not going to like paint them on, I'm going to cut them in.
Oh, yeah.
Like you don't even need like a powered Dremel. You can like, if you're very careful, remember to, ask for your parents' permission before you do this. You can take a triangular pointed X-Acto blade and hold it dull side down and then very carefully draw a line. And so the point will cut, but the wider angle of the blade will cause a separating gash. And you want to go subtle with that. You don't want to get crazy. There's also some very small, very, very fine hand drill bits that you can get.
Oh, yeah, like a pin vise and little drill setup.
Yeah, and you can put very shallow but visually effective holes into some of the figures. I think that is more my philosophy. It's weird because I do painting, like I paint pictures and stuff like that, and I do all the illustrations for our episodes, though I feel like I should spend more time with those. But I need to focus more on the painting on my models. I'm still trying to figure out what I like. I mean, we can talk about things like pin washing because I try not to get too obsessive about it, but somehow I end up falling into that method unconsciously.
So to walk you through my basic approach is I brush on primer. I do not aerosol because I don't like the dustiness. And where I live, the climate is like different every freaking day. So it's like I can't count on there being nice weather all the time to prime. So I brush it on. I have the thin Vallejo gray primer, and I just brush it on. Not the air primer, just the regular stuff. And it works wonderfully. It's like 2 or 3 coats, thin it with like the finest amount of water, and you're off to the races. Once I've done that, I've become a contrast paint user. It's how I base coat now. You don't have to use it. You can base coat with traditional acrylics and it's totally fine. But there's 2 things I really enjoy about contrast paint. One is the way in which it moves when you push it with the brush. It has a different characteristic than an acrylic because of the medium that it uses. So you can kind of like navigate it. You don't do these strokes in the same way that you would. Like your brush control is different because you're more like moving and pushing something to where it needs to get to feed it into the corners and recesses. But when you do this, you can create really effective shading and shadowing. Not as much highlights, but you can create the impression of greater depth with one coat of this. I'm not someone who stops at that, though. I do not believe contrast paint is a one-stop shop because when a model is contrasted and stopped at, or contrasted and ink washed and stopped at, it's very obvious how you got to that point. And not to disparage that, because I've gone online and shared models I painted and kind of been criticized, been like, that's not enough work. You just contrasted that. So it doesn't feel good. But like I've come to a stage now where I'm doing additional layers beyond the contrast. Like it's mostly dry brushing. I'm not doing no edge highlighting. Like that's, again, for me, these are gaming pieces that I want to look as fantastic as possible for the immersion. They're not display pieces. They're not to be seen in my mind, even though this is an artistic process, as a piece of art. That is something you can do and is so valid. Very important to this hobby that there are people who in fact take it to that level. But to me, I want to get a game out of this. So I paint to that standard. So it's the primers, the contrast, initial kind of dry brush of selective things to lighten them up. Then I like the Army Painter washes, so I stain down a little bit, add that contrast, and I build back up a little bit with a little bit more dry brushing, and then ensure the model's got the details that I'm happy with at that stage, and then we're on to the basing I talked about. And that's kind of my approach. I use an ultra matte varnish, and that is to protect the model, but more importantly, to make it look real good. Like a matte varnish will sell a model. And when it is applied, it doesn't just put a matte effect on it. There's like a weird filter almost that pulls together the blend, the highs and low, the gradient between the colorations to sort of unify them somehow. And I don't know what I'm describing or how that actually works. Max, maybe you do. But the varnishing step is an important step for a visual finish in terms of both protecting that paint, but also the way it kind of seals the deal.
Yeah, I mean, if you want like the matte varnish thing, it's just because it's dispersal, right? So it's essentially blending the color by sort of dampening the way that it bounces back. I think, yeah, obviously you need to varnish them because they look more finished.
Yes.
But here's the thing that I like to keep in mind with the varnishing. Yes, I think matte varnish, for the most part, works really good. But I think it's good to keep that gloss varnish somewhere and to use it like paint. So if you've got windows on something, gloss them. If you've got lights, gloss them.
So targeted application of a gloss varnish.
It's just another kind of paint, essentially. But if you want to, what you're painting with is the light in the room, right? And you have to be pretty careful about how you do that. Sometimes I'll actually go matte over the whole thing, and then I'll go back and add gloss over the matte. This can have a mixed effect.
That satin finish?
Yeah, but they don't blend together in the way that like satin would. But like, yeah, so there's a lot of ways that to use BattleTech as an example. Some people like do like gradients in the screening on the cockpit.
Oh yeah.
But I always find that it's just cool to like, I don't know how I feel. How do you feel about effect painting? Sorry, I guess this is what I'm transitioning it to. Do you know what I mean? Effect painting?
Like OSL, like object source lighting and like that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, like that's interesting. Like painting like reflections or really detailed glass effects onto the model's view screens, stuff like that.
But like in a graphic way, not in a material way. I've seen some really cool things done where they're like almost painted in a cel shaded style where you're using really high contrasts and very flat applications.
That's cool. I've seen that too. That like it's almost like a comic book effect.
Yeah, I actually think this works better on smaller miniatures if you can pull it off because they already have a very graphic approach. They almost do this automatically. But yeah, if you can create just like flat surfaces of a color with very deep cutting contrast just next to that within like, so effectively what you'd be doing is probably painting it all in like a couple of dark tones and then painting flat colored siding to different areas and then maybe adding some highlights, blending some highlights into them.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know how I feel about like graphical painting. Like sometimes I feel like making it more like, it seems almost unreal. And I think it depends on the setting and stuff. Like I think with like things like 40K, that works really, really well. But when you're doing World War II or like historic stuff, I like to have them be more like actual, like a miniaturized version of that thing. So adding those graphical effects, aside from like mud and stuff like that, looks weird.
Well, it's very cool for display purposes, but it takes it out of the table context. And that's why I like a more neutrally lighted and more neutrally painted model, is because it feels more natural within the context of the table that the game's happening on.
It's not angle dependent, right? Well, not that it would be. It still looks good. Like, don't get me wrong, but it is painted more like a flat image.
Yeah.
And I've seen some really cool ones. Like someone painted a Grey Knight with the wrist bolter, and they had actually like illuminated the inside of the bolter barrel and then created like cast light onto the hand.
Oh, that is sick.
So it looked like it was firing, but that style works better for that setting in the way that like that kind of, you can pull that off. But I don't think I'd ever do that with historics.
No, I don't think I would. Like I've seen like the Silver Bayonet. It is a fantasy historical game where you take Napoleonic themed characters to fight Gothic horrors. And I've seen people like take like a sort of like a witch hunter, you know, with like a torch and paint the lighting and the shadow from that torch onto that model. And it was like a historically themed model and it looked fantastic. But I know what you mean. Like when I paint Napoleonic line infantry, it's to get them done. It's not to like do very fancy things with that process. And you also have to remember, like, what is the intent behind the models themselves? Like that's something that I feel like is just a little bit of dissonance in BattleTech, because in BattleTech you have like 4 to 8 guys on the table at once, yet they're typically painted faster or with faster techniques than a lot of Warhammer models, which come in armies of like 80 dudes.
I find the painting culture between Warhammer and BattleTech to be weird. I feel like it somehow should be reversed. BattleTech painters, take more time. There are some amazing ones out there, but a lot of them, they look blotchy. You need to go slower with thinner coats. Sometimes it's too thick, and sometimes it just looks smeared, and you needed to add more layers of paint. I try to aim for the vision of a post-apocalyptic sports car.
Oh, cool.
Sometimes it's just like, wow, you could have taken a little more time with that. I'm just like looking on Reddit and stuff like that, but sometimes the designs are good. And I know that it's hard to get those effects, but you're literally given one of the, it's all right angles for the most part. You're given some of the easiest models. They're splayed in T poses. There's no way you can't get that paint job right.
I know what you're saying. Like, yeah, it's not a guy hunched over an MG hiding behind a bush. It's like a robot standing up.
It's not a space marine clutching a bolter up against his chest while he fires, where you have to somehow get between the inside of, and again, you don't want to kill yourself doing this either, but like get between the chest plate and the bolter, right?
Yes.
There's no mech pose that looks like that. I mean, not that I've seen.
Oh, Max, I do sub-assemblies on all of my tactical marines, Max.
Oh, I mean, sure. Yeah, you can carve off the arms and stuff.
No, never. Never.
Sure. You can put them in cooler pose. Honestly, one of my big beefs about the Battletech miniatures is that they're not in assemblable pieces, because then you can put like hip twists and arm twists.
Yeah, there'd be so much.
They just come in one solid piece. And if I want to do that, I have to pretty drastically mangle the thing. And maybe that's cool. I can hide it with battle damage and stuff like that. But it's just like, I was like, oh, well, it's for ease of use. I'm like, the painting's the hard part. The assembly is, I've never heard anybody really complain about assembling a model. It's not that hard.
The only models that are hard to assemble are like the kind of more specific Games Workshop stuff that gets very like high detail. Like some of their very fiddly, like some of their Necromunda models, like the what are they called? House Spire, right? You know, the rich guys who come down to terrorize everybody.
Oh yeah,
those models are a nightmare.
Yeah,
like they're so hard to build.
I don't doubt it. Yeah.
So I have had like, and also the trees that came with Warcry 2nd edition in that starter box, Heart of Gur. Oh my God. The most frustrating thing I think I've ever built is these freaking trees that just like are these stupid organic shapes that don't actually mesh together at all. So you're like holding 3 branches together at these obscene angles, and you're trying not to flinch or twitch or anything. It was a thing. But it kind of does bring me to my next topic, though. When you're thinking about terrain, where do you fall on the art of building terrain to the necessity of just buying it?
Okay, so what do you mean by buying it? Do you mean like
going to the store and buying like Battlefield in a box or a Games Workshop terrain set? Like, you know, like buying an actual plastic or a resin kit or MDF, truly. But like, is that any less valid than the honorable process of crafting your own terrain? Or is it just a reality nowadays that like no one has time and let's just go buy our terrain?
I think either is fine. I mean, obviously you can get a very special kind of craftsmanship if you build it from scratch. But I don't think I've seen anything wrong with buying terrain sets or whatever that might be. Sometimes, now this is an interesting complaint I might have. Sometimes I find that if there's too much character in the terrain, it looks static and it almost has a repetitiveness when you put it back on the table. Whereas if you make the terrain look really generic or really simple, it's almost representational in a lot of ways, and it feels more reusable. Like I'm thinking of like some of the stuff that GW puts out about like some of the stuff you have where it's like, it's got these really crazy looking like molded like spiral sort of motifs and runes and stuff cut into them. And a little bit that's cool. But I find when you get really carried away with it, it looks too much like it's too one of a kind looking.
Yeah.
And so when I put it on the table and I move it, they're like, or if I get 2 of them, it looks weird.
It does.
When I put them both in the same place. And I'm like, that's the effect that I don't want to say object to, because terrain's terrain. Like for me, it's all game pieces. You know, you're just making them look good and, you know, you're having fun painting them. But for me, it's not about making the one piece look good. It's about the ensemble effect of all of these pieces coming together to make it look cohesive. unless you're doing it for the sake of making a set piece, like a diorama piece, I'd rather it be a different emphasis on the way that it looks and that everything look more consistent among each piece. I find it's easier for me to get into the game when it has that effect.
I'm going to agree with you. I have old Darren, our bud here. We have a lot of the old foregrounds MDF terrain in 15 mil that's no longer available, sadly. We even have from Pegasus Bridge the sandwich shop that's right next to the bridge, right? And every time that we play and we set that out, to me it's the sandwich shop, and it's not ever not the sandwich shop. And like maybe it's because I've actually eaten a sandwich there, so like maybe I'm reflecting personally in my experiences. But like I feel like these terrain pieces that are too bespoke sometimes become like a character in their own right, and then you're using the same guy in every battle, and it's stretching the disbelief a little bit. Do you know what I'm saying? Or the suspension of disbelief, I mean.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And the mindset that I like to take with terrain is I like to think of trying to make the terrain look like it were like a 1950s B movie, where like all the pieces represent the thing that they do, but they're so interchangeable that like I could reuse that same gas station 5 times, you know, or like an infinite number of times, because it's just generic gas station, right? It's not like Bill's discount. I mean, sometimes it's fun to put little jokes and stuff. I don't think it's a problem to have like a sign that has a specific thing on it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking more about the quality of it. When it looks just, it goes over the line of fun distinct and it becomes overly distinct.
Yes, like I mentioned it earlier, but we have a manor house we use in some of our World War II gaming, and we used it as the mayor's house in our game last night, me and Darren. But we don't use it every game because it's so distinct and it has such a character to it that's like every time we use it, it's almost like it implies the history of its use in its appearance again. And it's like, right, it's not that same manor house, even though it most certainly is that same hunk of resin. But that's something to me that I agree with you about there is like, I have some 40K terrain that I love, but it's so bespoke and detailed that it's kind of like, okay, well, this is my crazy manufactorium. And if I'm ever there, I can use this. And if I'm anywhere else, well, this makes no sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I have the other things, those 2 STC bunkers they sold, you know, that just like rectangular hab bunkers. I got those. And I can use them on every table. And maybe I'll like put trees beside them or stack junk on them or lean something up against it. And now it looks like a different thing. But that fundamental, like rectangular sci-fi bunkerish building, it's so versatile, unlike a statue of a Sisters of Battle lady standing on a tank, right? You're like, okay, I can use that once. And then that's like my set piece for that campaign. You know what I mean? Unless I'm like in that square again. And you don't have to think like this. This is crazy person talk. But I will say it makes a difference in your mind's eye.
Yeah, as I said, we are thinking, I think, Troy, you and I both have the mindset of, as I've said like multiple times now, that we treat them more as game pieces than pieces of art. Like if I want to make a piece of art that looks cool, I'll sculpt it myself, and it'll probably be bigger because I can get more detail on it. Or I'll commit to like a full fixed diorama.
Right.
Which I've never done, but practically speaking, I would apply that level of like, you know, directional lighting and visual sort of effects, because I think they look cool, but for me personally, I find them a little distracting on the table. And it doesn't really matter. Like, you know what? Like, I'm not going to say like, oh, that looks too much like a very, very specific place. I'm never using that terrain. I don't care that much, honestly. I just, starting from nothing, that's my mindset, you know?
Yeah, like that's actually a good point. If you're starting terrain, what do you start with? For me, it's trees, hill, river. That's going to give you 3 things. It's going to give you area terrain, it's going to give you elevation, and it's going to give you difficult terrain or impassable terrain, depending how you classify your river. And so you get like 3 different broad terrain categories that'll work whether you want to sci-fi it, fantasy it, or historical it, because they haven't been defined per se by like unless you crash an X-Wing into the woods, it's not a Star Wars piece, right?
Sure.
So it's like you can do different things. That's what I would recommend to start with. In terms of how you get those, there's a few ways. You can go to Games Workshop for like the plastic parts, but you have to assemble and paint them, which is a whole process in their own right, just like we've described. But that's a process. You can go to Battlefield in a Box by Gale Force 9. And what they do is they do pre-painted resin models and pre-painted, pre-prepared trees. And those are really nice, made as game pieces. They're a little pricey sometimes, but they're very nice. An alternative to this other type of wilderness terrain, though, is you can go model railroad, baby, like Woodland Scenics, and get like a pack of 8 trees for $24. And then they're not like necessarily wargamer trees in that they're like all plastic with like a skeleton man at the base, like, no, you don't worry about that. But it'll be different types of trees. You can base them however you want. Sometimes they come on little bases. Sometimes you need to put them on a different type of platform. And then you can, just like Max said, this is where those tufts are coming in handy again, because you can base around the tree in such a way as to blend its footprint into the table better so that it matches your table surface, whether you're using a blanket, a cloth, neoprene mat, or whatever, right? And I'm a big fan of the Woodland Scenic trees. I use their flock, their sand grit stuff. I use their glues. So they have like really good general like dioramic terrain materials that I partner up with the Vallejo dioramic terrain materials to really like give a certain quality and presence to the basing of my models that helps to account for my more like high contrast impressionistic paint style.
Yeah, you want to be careful with using the train stuff. I think for anything natural, that it works fine because nature's scalable.
Yeah, for trees and rocks.
When you're using buildings and stuff like that, the scales don't map exactly on. I know a friend of ours he was like keen on the idea of, I think, using maybe like an HO scale or something like that. And it looks like it's close to 15, but it's not really. Maybe 10 would work.
Yeah, I think 10 would be fine, but no, you're right. You're totally right about HO. And that's a really good point because a model railroad building might seem like another alternative, but as Max pointed out, those are scaled differently. So the trees, like a tree is a tree, can grow to any height at all. We've all seen trees for the most part. But that's something I point out is like, if you want to get into the terrain side, focus on those most ubiquitous and multi-applicable pieces of terrain that you can. Like 2 hills, some piney trees, some deciduous trees, and maybe like a little windy river. That's a 3x3 to a 4x4 table, decently, like not amazingly covered, but like decently footprinted with terrain. And then you can have your knights ride through it. You can have your Panzer Grenadiers creep through the bushes looking for where the allies are. Like you can do all types of things with that. I think that's a great starting point for terrain. And then you just dial in what you want. Like, oh, I am doing Normandy. Okay, well, there are MDF kits. There are plastic kits. There's resin. There's stuff you can 3D print. You can follow build guides on YouTube. So there's a lot of things you can ultimately do. When you get into sci-fi, you can get really wacky with it and like paper mache stuff and build all types of things. Like there's a guy in our local community in where I live who posted, like he's got like what looks like a 25 mil, 28 mil, like kind of slightly smaller than appropriate to Warhammer scaled building. But he's like carved the building up and given it arms and legs and made it into an orc gargant. And it looks sick.
That's awesome.
So it's a really creative build. And it's like, that's also a really interesting thing you can do is you can kit bash, you can convert, you can sculpt like with green stuff. And that's another aspect of the arts and crafts of the hobby is like when you take something that comes as a product and then you personalize that. Like you take the hand and you cut it off and you put a chainsword hand on it. Or you take that guy's cape and you put it on someone else, Like that type of stuff, I find a little bit out of my league sometimes. I do lots of kit bashing where I take different kits and mix components all the time. But I don't commonly convert, wherein I make hard cuts or file things on or off or whatever. You know what I mean?
I think that it's the best of both worlds if you do kit bashing, especially with terrain, where you get like a set and then you start adding things to it. A really good example of this, I remember finding some Pacific World War II emplacements, and they were very bare bones. Like they literally just looked like a pavilion, basically a house with no walls and just pillars.
Right.
And then it had a little bit of a defensive structure around the bottom of it. But I had seen somebody who had taken, I guess they were like balsa wood or popsicle sticks, and chopped wooden roof tiles out of it and then put very, very fine fiber on top so that it looked like straw.
That's sick.
So it had like a hut effect, which is closer to what they would actually look like. And in some cases, like depending on where you get these, they either imply that you're going to add that detail yourself, or they're just not thinking about it. And they're just, yeah, here's the frame.
That's a big thing about terrain is like, you can really go off the deep end with it. Like our Normandy table has taken us about 10, 12 years to make, and we can do rural, village, town, straight through. More intact than rubble, which is something that Darren bemoans. And it's like, we need to get a ruined village now. I'm like, oh my God, do we? But I really think that when you get to the standard of table that you can arrive at, it's secretly, I'm looking over my shoulder when I say this, it's the terrain that sells it. I mean, you can paint your models to the highest degree, but they're still only as big as like a finger on a table that's like 4 feet to 6 feet big. It's going to be the terrain that demands your immediate first glance of attention on a table. And if that is just like a couple books stacked up and an upside down water glass, it works. But you're losing something. And something that I want to point out is I bemoan tables where there are these lovingly painted and modeled armies being played on the most boring, ugly terrain possible. And I'm like, you're missing not only half the battle, but 2/3 of it.
Yeah, and like proxies are good if you want to just try the game out.
I proxy sometimes. I've played a million games unpainted. You know, I've done all of this. But my big thing I want to say is painting in itself is a rewarding pastime. It's meditative in a way. It is high focus, low stress. So you can like really lock it in, but there's no consequence to like not doing, to like getting it wrong, because you just repaint it or you strip it or you don't care. Like this is something I say, and I'll say this here as we get close to the end, 95%. That's my painting goal. I want 95% good.
Right.
Like if I like clip the chin with a little bit of this brown from the rifle, I'm going to cover that up with my next paint layers in successive highlights. I'm not going to go back and reprime it and repaint it and fix it and be like, okay, I'm back to 100. Like that's not the point. The point is 95%. A satisfactory completion within a decent amount of time that, when viewed on the table, is the genuine article. I want to throw it back to you. What is your goal when you paint?
That's a good question. I'm not actually sure how to phrase that.
Because I don't have the same artistic endeavors that you have to maybe satisfy the same creative itch. So I find this to be a really great way to almost fill that void. Do you feel that that's necessary in your life, or do you see it as something else entirely?
Not how I would approach like a purely creative thing. It's fun working within the limitations of it and seeing what comes out of it. I find that rewarding because I can draw something up from scratch, and at least to my satisfaction. But I always keep in mind, I think this is what I've said throughout this episode, is that I keep in mind that what I'm making is a game piece. And so I want it to be the best version of that.
Yeah.
I want it to be like a top level game piece. So I try to add all the care that someone making a diorama piece would, but the choices that I make are going to be more reflective of that. I don't see it as an outlet for, like an ultimate outlet for my creativity, if that makes sense.
I see it as a really good way to flex some creative muscles, to have a meditative activity that demands focus, gets you away from screens, lets you breathe and do something new. And then you have this personal relationship to the models you've worked on, and to an extent that like you feel connected to them.
Mm-hmm.
More so than something that came out of the box for the pre-painted paint job, because you did that paint job. It's your hours that you invested. And I think that all makes the painting game worth it. I didn't want to do it for a long time. I bought a lot of models knowing in my heart, like, I'm never going to paint these. I'm going to play them with plastic. I don't care. But it's like, no, I do care. And I want to get there. And I have recalculated my total hobby ambitions around my new goal of getting it painted. Like there's stuff I'm selling now that I was like, you know, I'm never going to get to this. Like, what am I doing? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now that I see painting as more inherent and more part of a holistic hobby, something I'm going to make sure I do.
So, I don't know. I mean, we can go on and on about this, and we might come back to it later.
Arts and Crafts 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah, in fact, we're going to try and post more of our stuff on Instagram. So if you guys clue in on that one, we'll put a link. I I think most of it is your stuff. I think I put a few kit bashes in there. I'm still painting those.
Yeah, give me some more pictures, Max, and I'll share them. But I'll start sharing up my most recent paint jobs. I've got Games Workshop, Heresy, 40K. I've got War Games Atlantic, Quar, and Classic Fantasy Battles, and I've got Battlefronts, World War II. So I've got a bunch of stuff I've been working on.
Yeah, you're a more, weirdly enough, between like our interests and skill sets, you're a more prolific model painter than I am. I gotta step it up.
Right on. Well, I think this has been a great episode. I've really enjoyed it. Max, do you want to let us know what's coming up next?
Next, I am going to be covering the Mech Warrior RPG.
Oh, speaking about Battletech, let's get into the cockpit then.
Which is funny because the first Battletech thing that we covered was actually like the very first thing. And this is the very first edition of Mech Warrior. And
I look forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But yeah, it's unique for sure. But yeah, that's what we'll be getting into. And hopefully you'll all join us and we'll have a good time with that.
Excellent. Well, thanks for listening. We really enjoy getting to share these thoughts and opinions with you all. Otherwise, have an excellent rest of your day and happy gaming.
Happy gaming, everyone.
We hope you enjoyed delving into today's episode. A big thanks to all of you out there for joining us. If you want to continue the conversation, you can find us on Instagram and YouTube at Tales and Tactics Podcast or on all popular podcast platforms. Join us again on the next exciting episode of Tales and Tactics.